which fantasy romance books are actually worth your time? We're gonna dive right in and talk all about, in my opinion, the best fantasy romance books that you should be reading. So let's get into it. Now, I have read, I think, a lot of fantasy romance books. The genre is super big on BookTok, BookTube, any social media platform is talking about fantasy romance books. It's become its own genre. And I'm not gonna lie, it does have its space, it does have its time and place. However, I do think some things are overdone. And I also think a lot of them aren't really worth your time unless you don't really care so much for originality and you're kind of just going in waiting for the romance, and if there's a little sprinkle of magic and kingdoms and princes and princesses, then that's great too. But the books I wanted to talk about, I think, have a great mix of fantasy elements, romantic plot lines. They're fast-paced, they're engaging, they have everything you want in a great story without the fluff. I do have some stipulations with these as well. All these books are fairly clean, or they're gonna be in the YA genre, so it's either gonna be fade to black, or there's not really gonna be much of that extra content. So there's that. But we're gonna go ahead and start off strong with a fantasy author that I don't hear talked enough about. I have read pretty much all of her books, and I do think she's coming out with an adult fantasy sometime this year. That author is Mary E. Pearson, and the duology that I wanted to bring up is Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves. This is a fantasy romance with less of a magic system or a heavy magic system and more of political intrigue. We have two rival kingdoms, which means we also have enemies to lovers. Probably my favorite trope in a fantasy romance, honestly. It's kind of a cat and mouse chase of this band of women who have been set on this mission by their queen, and he is this new leader of his people, and somehow they end up stuck together, and it kind of just goes from there. It is such a fun read, and it's very fast-paced as well. If you're someone who's nervous about stepping into the fantasy genre, I think you would really enjoy this book because it, like I said, it does have fantasy elements, but it's so light, you'll probably end up forgetting that it is a fantasy. If you've read this duology and you loved it, or if you read this and you fall in love with it and you're like, I wish I had more, there is a prequel series called The Remnant Chronicles. Takes place in the same kingdom, but different people, different stakes, different storyline. Still very good, but I had to give this specific series a shout out. On the opposite side of things, we have an Ember in the Ashes series. This is definitely more heavy-handed with fantasy, and these are really large books. Like, it's gonna take you a while to get through these, but this is probably one of the best written fantasy series I have read from YA. Probably ever. And again, I don't see a lot of people talking about it, maybe because it's been a while since it was first published. Sabat Tahir wrote the Ember in the Ashes series. I love the original illustrations for the covers, they're beautiful. We have a girl named Laya whose basically entire family worked for this resistance. The kingdom that they live in is under this super cruel martial empire. They have really strict laws, and unfortunately her family pretty much all gets killed off, and her brother gets taken hostage. So she takes it upon herself to kind of join this resistance to try and get him back. And they're like, okay, yeah, sure, you can, but you're gonna have to do it our way. And our way means you have to go join this military academy and gather intel and all this. And it goes absolutely downhill from there. She and this military guard named Elias, he is in this school, and it's kind of their back and forth love story. Each book gets more and more emotional, and it just tugs at your heartstrings. They are crazy. And I remember reading the last book, ugly crying. Like, it was a crazy unexpected ending, but like I said, this is definitely more heavy-handed with fantasy. Even though you're gonna have a lot of action, there's gonna be a lot of war, a lot of politics and betrayal and all of the things that you're gonna get with like kingdom politics stuff. But then there's like this underlying magic system kind of weaves its way into this story, and it's done so well. I love their love story. I love the progression between books 1 through 4. If you're looking for a really serious fantasy series, but you want romance, definitely check out this one. It's not heavy-handed romance, and I can't say why, but if you prefer more fantasy, less romance, this is the series to read. And I will say, even though most of these books that I'm mentioning are YA, they're written so well, I think you will forget you're reading a YA book because the writing is just so mature and fast-paced. You're not gonna be thinking, is this for me? I don't know if anyone else gets like that with reading YA, but sometimes I do, and I think these are okay. I don't have book 1. I read it on Kindle, but I did pick up book 2, and that is What the River Knows and What the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez. This is another duology, and it's also a historical fantasy. So this takes place, I want to say late 1800s, early 1900s in Egypt. We kind of go back and forth between Argentina and Egypt, but most of book 1 and book 2 takes place in Egypt. Our main girl, Inez, she's living with family in Argentina, and she gets a telegram one day that her parents have suddenly passed away. They are Egyptologists, and they're studying archaeology and all of that in Egypt, and something doesn't sit right with her. She's like, I need to find out what's going on here. So she takes it upon herself to travel by herself. Again, at this time, it's like a serious no-no. And she takes it upon herself to go meet her uncle who does live over there. It's her mother's brother. And she meets him over there because she wants to find out the truth about what happened to her parents. So she gets there and nobody wants her there. They want to send her back. It's no place for a woman. It's like she doesn't have an escort. There's all these problems. So there's a lot of legalities with what she's doing. And there's a lot of history behind it, and with the hieroglyphics and the pyramids and all of the stuff that they're trying to discover. But there is fantasy elements woven into it as well. I won't get into it too much, but I would say, once again, this is going to be more of a romance with minor fantasy elements in it. If you liked Indiana Jones at all, I think you would really like this series. It's got mystery, puzzles, booby traps, running away from thugs, and all of that. It's super fun. And the banter between the two main love interests in this duology they are so fun. You will find yourself giggling, laughing, just gushing over these two characters. They're amazing. Isabel Ibanez just did Rivals to Lovers romance so well in this. And the inside cover for book 2 is so beautiful. I don't actually know if any of the history in these books is historically accurate because I know nothing about Egypt, but it's worth reading. If you are a KU girly, if you are obsessed with Kindle and you're looking for a good fantasy romance, but you are tired of reading them, or you didn't like the ones that you've been reading so far, or the ones that you do find online are just really graphic and spicy and not up your alley, you need to read the Lochlann Feuds. This is co-authored. It's written by Robin D. Mayle and Elle Madison, and it is a 4-book series. There are tons of books also within the same universe that they've written, so I would read this one first and then go from there. We have a reckless princess getting into an enemy kingdom. She's now stuck. She's taken hostage. She's kind of a firecracker, and she gets herself in a pretty sticky situation, and of course the only thing to do is get married to one of the people in this enemy kingdom. One of my favorite things with this series is that her kingdom is very polite and has etiquette and prim and proper and kind of like what you would expect a princess or a kingdom to look like. And their enemy kingdom has tribes, and they're a little more barbaric, it seems, and kind of rough around the edges. And it reminds me a lot of Outlander with like the different tribes or Scottish clans. I think that's what they're called, clans. So they have these thick accents and they talk funny, and it's so fun to read. The banter between our two love interests are so fun. It's a very fast-paced, really easy to read KU series. Like I said, it's 4 books, but you will fly through them. And as for tropes, we got enemies to lovers, found family, one bed trope. And like I said, it is, all of these books are pretty much closed door, fade to black, or nothing on page. So very easy. It's just like a fun, clean fantasy romance series. And I've read multiple series from them, and they're kind of all the same way. So if you like this one, go check out all their other books, but this one's my favorite. I think everyone can agree that Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows is probably one of the best historical fantasies written, and it's so hyped up, as it should be. I have the Owl Crate special editions. They are so beautiful. I mean, just come on now. They're stunning. We have two rival journalists in the midst of this war who basically find love by a magical typewriter. It's kind of like You've Got Mail, if you've seen that movie. This is gonna be more of an emotional romance, kind of tug at your heartstrings, less action-packed, even though there is a war going on. It's not really focusing on that, but more on our two characters and just their current situations and how they're dealing with living during this time. A lot happens to them and between them as individuals and as a couple. It is a lot, it's heavy. Get your tissues, but this is another duology. So if you're not looking for a huge fantasy series, this is a great option. And also it's not very heavy-handed with the fantasy elements as well. I think the typewriter is probably one of like the only magical things in this story. So again, if fantasy isn't really your thing, but you like romance and you want to dive into fantasy, this is a great option. You guys already know I'm gonna bring up my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. That is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I am so obsessed with this series. I love Jackson Evangeline so much. This is gonna be kind of like that princessy fairy tale love story you wish you had or you thought about when you were growing up. It kind of reminds you of that, okay? Very whimsical writing, very fun, cheeky, back and forth. Not necessarily rivals to lovers, but kind of a Grumpy Sunshine-ish vibe. Our main girl is very happy-go-lucky, believed in fairy tales and everything will work out, and our main guy Jax is the exact opposite of that. It is a 3-book series, and if you like this series, then you can also check out the Carvel series. It's like a prequel kind of series. Not necessary to read this, but I would say if you're starting out with fantasy romance and you are definitely more into YA writing, this is a great option. This is my favorite fantasy romance series of all time, and I'm not gonna talk about my age on here, but yeah, I'm definitely not a 15-year-old, so this is good for any aged reader. It is so fun. It makes you love, and you're just gonna feel really good. You're gonna be kicking your feet out and giggling throughout the whole series. I can't say enough good things about it. And I actually haven't heard anyone talk bad about this series. If you do have something negative to say, I don't want to hear it, but if you have good things to say, let's be besties in the comments. I actually think this next series is more than 2 books, but I made myself stop reading after book 2 because the rest of the series brings up other characters that I'm just not interested in. I did do that with Throne of Glass series. I did not read that one book that's like all Kale's point of view, but I digress. The Bridge Kindgom by Daniel L. Jensen, books 1 and 2 specifically. So we have the Bridge Kindgom and then we have the Traitor Queen. These 2 books are so good. I don't think these covers are out anymore. I think they changed them, but she is basically trained her whole life to be an assassin and to kill off the people from this enemy kingdom, but they kind of have an arranged marriage kind of going on, and so she's secretly married to him, but also she has a job to do kind of thing. It goes from there. It is intense. This is going to be more politically based as well, so if you like kingdoms and politics and battles and that kind of thing, you'll really like this. If you liked Aelin Galathinius from Throne of Glass, you will like this. If you like enemies to lovers, to enemies again, you will like this. I think book 2 was my favorite actually, which is surprising. I feel like normally book 1's enough book are always like the jumping off point for the rest of the story, but they have all the fun stuff. But this one was so stressful, but like in the best way. I have read other book series from her, but this is definitely my favorite. If you're looking for, I think this is more new adult, little older based. If you're wanting more YA, you could read the Dark Shores series. I think she's coming out with a new book in that series, or the conclusion to that series, but for this one specifically, you could just read 1 and 2 and be done with it. Like I said, the rest of this series has to do with other people, and I'm not interested in that. But that's it, guys. Those are my all-time favorite fantasy romance books that are actually worth your time and are completed series. Every single one of these books are done and dusted. There are amazing ones that I did not mention, but that's because the series is still ongoing. And sometimes you don't want to wait for the next book. You just want to read the whole thing in one go. So that's what this video is. I hope you got something out of it. If there is a series that you would recommend to me, please let me know in the comments. I absolutely love this genre or subgenre. It deserves pretty much all the hype it gets. So yeah, if you're looking for more book recommendations or bookish videos, go ahead and check out either of these. But until next time, I will see you in my next video. Mwah. Bye!